Namaskar, everyone. Today's topic is Did Brahmins monopolize education in ancient India? I should say at first that I'm not a scholar who has been working in these studies. I seek this subject as a student of Indic knowledge systems who has also encountered a lot of hostility from not just the leftists, but this issue is such an issue in which almost people, even on our side, unanimously say a lot of factions, even on our side, say that yes, the Brahmins did monopolize education in ancient India. There was birth-based discrimination; it was very bad, and there are a lot of axioms, a lot of beliefs that go beyond their claims. So today we'll analyze a few of them. So at first, when we say monopolize education, we should know our terms. We should know the definitions that we are using. That what do we mean by education when we talk about ancient India? Because as soon as someone says that, and let us for a second believe that Brahmins did monopolize education in ancient India, and as soon as someone says this, we start imagining, oh, they didn't let anyone study anything at all, and so there were no engineers, there were no craftsmen, no one was led to study anything, no one was led to study any book. But is this true? Uh, I will just quote a study for just 1 or 2 minutes, which this talk is not about that, but you must all be familiar with the great study that Sri Dharampalji did almost around 100 years ago. Many great scholars have gone into depth on Dharampalji's work, so I do not need to do that. I'm just stating a fact here, bringing the evidence here, that around 150 to 200 years ago, the situation of indigenous education in India was such that uh, almost everyone, every jati was studying all sorts of subjects. There were private schools, there were public schools, there were home schools, and everyone was studying almost everything except Vedic studies, except the Vedas directly, except very esoteric subjects related to the Vedas. Almost in no other subjects did Brahmins monopolize, or even they were in the majority number of students. They were in a minority in all of these subjects. Almost every jati, everyone was studying almost every other subject. So this is only the part that I'll quote about Sri Dharampalji's study. But some still say that this was the condition just 200 years ago, or just 250 years ago, 150 years ago. What was the condition of ancient India? I will just quote 1 or 2 examples to illustrate that even in ancient India, what we consider as crafts, skills, and vocational training, that was not prohibited to anyone. There is the evidence. Kama Sutra is a very famous text among those who comment upon India. They like to quote a lot of verses from it, but they often forget that in one chapter, uh, the author suggests that an accomplished, cultured woman, and some scholars say that he's not even addressing women, even men can do this. Or let us assume right now that he's just addressing women, cultured, accomplished women. He says that a cultured and accomplished woman has to learn 64 arts. And those 64 arts include virtually everything in arts, fine arts, and literature. So she has to sing well, she has to learn music, she has to learn drawing, painting, and almost all of the fine arts that are being taught in today's universities. So if you consider the scene of education that is prevalent right now, you can virtually say that all of the fine arts schools and universities, uh, just like they are functioning now, they were not like these universities, but everyone was also learning fine arts. There was no taboo on learning these crafts and skills. Then there is another evidence from the Hindu temple. I study the Hindu temple, the Hindu architecture, and that's why I bring in a lot of examples from that. There were a lot of people involved in this culture that was being carved on almost every available surface on the outer walls of a Hindu temple. There were a lot of craftsmen involved in even creating the architecture that gave us millions of good examples of Hindu temples. They were not all Brahmins. Only the Pradhan Shilpi, only the main architect, they were Brahmins. Only a few people who were engaged in rituals, before the temple was actually built, they were Brahmins. The craftsmen, the sculptors were virtually all what you would classify now as Shudras. The people who created these temples actually created the beautiful images of our deities, our devtas. They were all Shudras, and they were not prohibited from creating those murtis, creating those vigrahas. So these two examples tell us that even in ancient India, the artisans and craftsmen, they were not prohibited from learning anything. So we can, what we now consider is what we now classify as vocational training. Let us be very clear about it that vocational training was not considered education in the sense of the Vedic studies, and they were not prohibited to anyone. Now the question comes to, I will also discuss that was it hereditary or not in a bit. Now we'll discuss the issue about were the Vedas prohibited to Shudras or to other Varnas. In this, we have to say that yes, they were prohibited. Not everyone was allowed to perform a yajna. And not everyone was allowed to, in later stages, some Smritis also do record that not everyone was even allowed to listen to the incantations or the performance of these yajnas. But before that, we have to consider, we have to rethink a question. When we think about Vedas, there is a strain of presentism in all of us, and we tend to back project the conditions that are prevalent today on ancient societies. So we tend to think of the Vedas as books, 4 books, but actually the Vedas were not 4 books. Because now they are of course recorded in on paper. Now they are printed and published and available for anyone to study. But the Vedas were not actually books. They were manuals for performing yajnas. They were a lot of other things, but they were virtually manuals for performing. They were formulas for performing yajnas. And in order to do that, you had to be trained in it for your entire life. So the Vedas were not books, they were lifestyles. And now we have to pay attention towards how is a lifestyle carried forward. Lifestyle is not something, is not a fashion, is not a hairstyle that you can take upon one day. And when you get bored of it after 2 weeks, let's say, or 1 week, and now in this age, even 2 or 3 days, and you abandon it and you adopt another fashion. Culture is not like fashion. Culture has to be born not just your entire lifetimes, but also through many generations. And so Vedas were a lifestyle and they were carried forward by extreme discipline and hard work. The life of the Brahmins, people see a lot of privileges that they say that the Brahmins had a lot of privileges, but they do not see. Let us for a moment assume that they indeed have those privileges, but they do not see what disadvantages did they have uh, in carrying this knowledge tradition, knowledge system forward. They could not avail, they could not engage in great trade. Yes, they could grow some vegetables and grow some food in their backyard in the land provided, gifted by the king or some or society, civil society. Yes, they could grow some food for themselves, but they could not trade. They had to beg for a living. Those who were employed in the pursuit of the great branches of knowledge, they had to beg. They had to actually get food from the society, live on the mercy of the society. Yes, our society respected them very much, but they did not have a choice in what they ate and what they wore. They just got by. It was a very hard lifestyle, and uh, it was carried forward the entire life. I will just give you one example. I did a study on a very ancient temple, Hoysar temple in Belawadi, Veer Narayan temple, Belawadi. Many of you must have been familiar with this temple. It is one of the most famous of the Hoysar temples. It comes into the Belur, Halebadu, and Belawadi circuit. I became friends with the chief priest there. He is my age, almost my age. And when I first went there, I was very impressed that how can a young man of and he was very well versed in English and Hindi and in the modern subjects too. And he was there in that temple, devoting his entire life to carrying forward the puja, the rituals that go on with an ancient temple. And he told me what he had to sacrifice in order to be there. When the question of coming up, he is the only son of his father. When the question came up of who would be the successor of his father, the chief priest of Veer Narayan temple at Pelawadi, then he had to sacrifice a lot of things because he could go abroad. He had many offers. He was well qualified even in modern subjects, modern disciplines. He could take on any subjects and get a very plus job even abroad or even inside India. But he sacrificed all of that and became the chief priest in the Veer Narayan temple, Belawadi. And I'll tell you what this sacrifice means. It means that he can never now cross the boundaries of India because they go by that. There can be a different discussion whether that injunction is true or not, but they go by that injunction that a priest, a Brahmin, he should not cross the boundaries of Bharatvarsh. So he can never go abroad. He always has to wear a certain kind of attire. Uh, he has to follow a lot of rituals every day in his life. And those rituals mean that he has to be a swapaki for the days that he actually carries, which are 99% of days. He actually carries the offers of worship in the temple. He has to cook for himself, and even if he goes to toilet even once, he has to bathe again, do all the ablutions again if he has to perform another puja, another worship in the temple. And there are actually 5 worships every day in a temple, and this he has to do his entire life. It is fun when we go to that temple once. We Yes, it is very spiritual, it's very peaceful, it's very calm, but it's in a very very small village. There are not more than 5,000 or 6,000 people in that village. He has to spend his entire life there, repeating the same thing again and again. And this is just the story of a priest. Of course, Brahmins are not, the life of Brahmins is not limited to just priesthood. The other Brahmins who actually employ themselves in the study of wholeheartedly in some certain branch of Indic knowledge system, they have to follow even more rigorous methods. So this is how a lifestyle is carried. So Vedas were not books, they were lifestyles. And not everyone was allowed to carry it. We should say that not everyone was capable or able to or even willing to carry that. And that's why a certain community was doing it. Now the question comes that it was hereditary, it was birth-based distinction. Yes, it was. Because there was virtually, first of all, more than anything, there was virtually no other way to train anyone in anything. Because if you wanted to be a carpenter, let's say, I'm also talking about the other skills and other crafts. If you wanted to become a carpenter, there were no universities of carpentry where you could travel in a plane by air or by rail or by road and then go there, reach there in one day or a few hours and go to that school and university, have a good life in hostel and lodging, and then after studying it you could land a job in a multinational company. It wasn't like that. There were no universities, no colleges for these crafts and skills. The only way one could learn a certain crafts and skill was to become an apprentice of someone who practiced that same art, same skill. Now, in most cases, in an overwhelmingly large number of cases, it was very natural for kids, for children to follow in the footsteps of their fathers and forefathers because it was very natural. They were growing up watching their father doing, engaging in a certain skill. It was very easy to do it. And so that's what they did. And if somebody wanted to do some different thing, then he had to go to a person who was willing to take him as an apprentice, and he would teach him for 10, 20 years. Then he would become skilled in that particular crafts or particular skill. This happened with fine arts. This happens with certain artisans who wanted to learn a certain um, craft, and for that they went to a guru and became his apprentice, and over decades they became adept in it. So it was possible to do that, but we have to understand that there were no central universities, there were no PET or IIT JEE or no sorting hat of Harry Potter where you could uh, judge the aptitude of children, that what will they become when they grow up, and so assign a particular crafts to them when they grow up. And by the time they grew up, they were already well versed in some sort of a skill, and most people chose to stay in that craft for the rest of their lives. So we have to understand that this was also the case with the Brahmins. They followed in the footsteps of their fathers, and because Vedic studies, most of all, they required decades and decades of learning, decades and decades of following that lifestyle. And that is why they had to be trained by the age of, let's say, their training started by the age of 4 or 5. And it went on until they were well into their adulthood. So it was hereditary, it was birth based, but there was no choice. It was possible to break these distinctions. We will discuss them later on. But this was for the majority of the population, it was very natural. Sanatan Dharma had the wisdom to accept what is natural, accept what is common for the majority of the population, and uh, they went along with that. They created systems which harness this natural tendencies of people uh, the best. So now the question comes, that was the Vedic knowledge. We have now decided that the crafts and skills and vocational training, these subjects were not actually prohibited to anyone. But were the Vedas prohibited? Was the Vedic knowledge itself prohibited? Now here we have to make a very, very important distinctions, which is, I think, the most important point that I'm going to make in this talk. We have to make the distinction between the Vedic knowledge and the means of creating Vedic knowledge. Vedic knowledge was not prohibited to anyone. We should be very, very clear about it. And I will illustrate with very powerful examples in a few minutes that it was not prohibited. Only the means of creating knowledge were prohibited. The means of creating knowledge were, as we have already discussed, it contained an entire lifestyle, it contained training of decades. And there was the danger of misunderstanding, misappropriating the Vedas and the knowledge that is contained in them. And that was potent knowledge. It could not just be misinterpreted, it could not just be left ununderstood, but it could be potentially misunderstood to the detriment of the entire society. And we are seeing its results now when people like those who are anadhikaris, like Sheldon Pollock, they are studying these Vedas and they are dismantling them upon our scriptures, and they are dismantling it. Knowledge was not Vedic knowledge, even Vedic knowledge was not prohibited to everyone. And I'll illustrate you how from three very potent examples. The Natya Shastra is a very famous text, which now almost everyone is familiar with. The Natya Shastra is a very famous text. It is around 2,500 years old. Dr. Bharat Gupji maintains that it is around 2,500 years old, and I tend to believe in. So it is a text which speaks on not just drama or the art of theater. It speaks very potently. Almost all fine arts in India, arts and fine arts, have to refer to the Natya Shastra at one time or the other. It is such a potent text. It has seeds of everything else. It speaks on iconography. It speaks on dance and music directly. Then through these disciplines, it speaks on sculpture. It speaks on a lot of other fine arts. So this Natya Shastra in chapter 1, verse 12, the Natya Shastra has its self-stated goal of taking the knowledge of the Vedas to those communities which are not able to partake in that knowledge directly. I'll quote chapter 1, verse 12, the Natya Shastra. As the Vedas are not to be listened to by those born as Shudras, be pleased to create another Veda which will belong to all the Varnas. So the Natya Shastra, the stated goal of the Natya Shastra is to take the knowledge of the Vedas to each and everyone. How? By drama, by various means, as we will discuss later on. First of all, by drama, that great stories of the Vedas, the Upanishads, and other epics and itihasas, they would be enacted again and again in society over the ages, all over India. The Natya Shastra took the knowledge of the Vedas to each and every nook and corner of India, to each and every city, town, and village of India by enacting the greatest stories containing the universal truths that the Sanatan civilization and culture espouse in capsule form to each and everyone. The people did not have to go to a certain place to watch this theater actually came to the people. So that's a very potent example about the Natya Shastra, that it actually uh, took the knowledge of the Vedas to everyone. And very significantly, it is called the fifth Veda. Now, the fifth Veda is a very fluid concept. A lot of scriptures claim to be the fifth Veda. The Mahabharata is also called the fifth Veda. Ayurveda is also called as the fifth Veda. An entire discipline and institution is also called as the fifth Veda. I guess our sages kept this concept of the fifth Veda fluid because Vedas themselves mean knowledge. And the fifth Veda, they left the possibility. Yes, everything was there in the Vedas. It means that the ultimate truth was contained in the Vedas, yes. But they did not want to convey the sense that no other book can have the truth. They did not want to claim exclusivity. That's why they floated the concept of the fifth Veda, where a lot of scriptures, not every scripture, not every text, but a lot of scriptures, they actually could claim to be the fifth Veda. And Natya Shastra claims itself very, very potently as the fifth Veda, and uh, it purports to carry the knowledge of Vedas to everyone. The second example is, as we discussed just now, the example of the Mahabharata. Mahabharata is also called as the fifth Veda. It is an itihasa, it is a great epic. It has not only many stories, it not only does encompass the entire complexity of this great world, this universe, but it also contains all of the philosophies, all of the major strengths of Hindu darshan, of Vedic darshan in itself, uh, in Bhagavad Gita and also elsewhere too. So, and the Mahabharata was not prohibited to anyone. It was enacted, its stories, many of its stories were enacted all over India. Not only this, uh, our poets, our ancient kavis, they they actually created great plays, great dramas based on certain episodes of the Mahabharata, because the Mahabharata is a great, great text. It is not possible to play it in entirety anywhere. So these great poets, uh, these sages, they took these particular example and then they played through the agency of Natya Shastra. They played this knowledge. They took this knowledge to each and every corner of India. And then I will also, once again, I will fall back on the example of the Hindu temple. The very concept of the Hindu temple is to take the knowledge of the Vedas to those who were previously not able to partake in it directly. Not everyone is able to chant the mantras. Not everyone is able to even understand those mantras directly, even if he listens to them. And so, the very purpose of the Hindu temple, it is quoted at many places, is to let those communities which were hitherto, which were not able to directly partake the knowledge of the Vedas. Because here, uh, just like in a Yajna, you invoke a deity, invoke a devta. In a temple, the murti is there in the garbhagriha, the vigraha is there in the garbhagriha. And when the priest invokes, when the priest officiates between the devotee and the deity, uh, I'll just explain the scene here, that a devotee goes to the temple, he stands in the mandapam, just at the boundary of the antaral. Antaral is where the priest officiates between the devotee and the deity, and in the garbhagriha there is no one else but just the deity, and the priest goes there to offer puja, offer worship. And when he invokes, the murti actually becomes the deity, actually becomes the devta. The Shakti descends, that Murti becomes the Devta itself. And then the act of, in the descent and ascent of Shakti of consciousness, uh, the devotee, without actually performing all the rituals that were performed in the Vedas in performing a Vedic yajna, or even the rituals that go into creating a temple, on running a temple, without doing that, a devotee was allowed to partake in the divine ascent and descent of consciousness, and that is wonderful. This means that our sages were constantly thinking about changing times and space, and they were constantly thinking about adapting the Vedic knowledge, the ultimate knowledge, according to modern and contemporary, not say, let's not say modern, contemporary idioms and phrases and means and institutions. Hindu temple was such an institution. And still, those individuals and those few communities. They were not in, because the Shudras were around at some time in our history, they were around 80% of the population. So of course, not all Shudras were prohibited from certain going to temples. But some community, let's say due to some historical, some social reason, they were, if they were prohibited from coming inside the temple, then the Hindu temple actually invented a very, very novel method of taking the divinity to them. There is a concept of Utsav Murti, Utsav Murti in a temple. The Utsav Murti is a metal Murti of the same deity which is Virajman, which resides in the Garbhagriha. This is a metal Murti, uh, often very, very much smaller than the main Vigraha. And on certain time during a year, sometimes in many temples, it happens many times during a Rath Yatra is carried out where the deity comes outside in the form of the Utsav Murti, comes outside the temple and actually does the round of the entire city, entire town. Rath Yatra is not a peculiar phenomena of the Jagannath Puri temple. Rath Yatra, as many of you coming from the south would know, that almost every temple has conduct some sort of Rath Yatra at least once in the year, or some temples conduct it many times. So once or twice or many times a year, the Devta actually comes out of the temple to give darshan to those few unfortunates who could not have darshan the rest of the year. So while the rest of the year the devotee comes to the temple to have darshan of the Devta, of divinity itself, once, at least once a year, the divinity, the Devta himself comes out of the temple to give darshan to those who were, because of certain reasons, excluded from this. I do not know of any other system which is as universal as this. I do not know any other system, any other institution which is as sympathetic as this to even those who, according to their own society, according to their own rules, are not living an exemplary life. It is compassionate even towards those. We can agree on their rules or not, agree on the exclusion and inclusion or not, but it created a system which ensured that the Vedic knowledge, Vedic tradition would be carried forward by everyone, would be taken to everyone. So, taking these three examples, it is very, very clear that the knowledge, Vedic knowledge, was not at all prohibited to anyone. Only the means of creating knowledge, the means of propagating that knowledge, they were prohibited. Once again, I will stress that propagating Vedic knowledge did not just mean printing and publishing a book and recording it on a hard disk or a CD or a Google Drive and then just forget all about it. The Vedas had to be learned, they had to be memorized. And I'm not an expert in this, great scholars will tell you about it, that how the Vedas, the Vedic tradition is carried forward through generations without committing a single mistake. That despite all of the attacks on India, all of the Islamic invasions, all of the colonialisms that plagued us for the past 800 years or so, these traditions were actually carried forward by the Brahmins. Now still you might ask that why wasn't everyone allowed to create those create the means of knowledge? That charge is absurd, because it amounts to saying that why aren't chartered accountants allowed to fly planes? Or this is like saying that why aren't Hollywood actors allowed to operate satellites? The benefit of the satellite is of course taken by everyone. Everyone takes a flight, everyone can take a flight, but everyone cannot be allowed to operate a flight. Everyone cannot be allowed to operate a satellite. Why? It's very, very simple. This, when you frame it like this, it becomes instantly very uh, very simple, very lucid, because it is a technical job. It requires experts. It requires training of lifetime. Not everyone can do it. I would not in the world want to do something like that. I am very thankful that others do it so that I can take benefit. I would not to want to fly a plane. I'm afraid enough to take a flight. So, but I want others to do it so I can take its benefit. So the Vedas were also like this. They were technical systems of propagating, creating, and propagating knowledge, uh, sustaining institutions which could do it, and not everyone was allowed to do it. Once again, why was it birth-based discrimination? Why was it hereditary? We have already discussed that there was virtually no other way. But still, you might ask that what if someone uncomfortable in his varna, let us assume for that some individuals were very uncomfortable in their varna. As far as jobs are concerned, as far as vocational training is concerned, I already told you that it was possible, and it actually regularly happened that people became apprentice of other great masters in other great skills and jobs that they were performing, and gradually they became adept in it. But most people followed in the footsteps of their fathers. But while studying ancient Indian knowledge systems, we cannot pick and choose about what to believe and what not to believe. If you are if you believe without fail that it was a birthright based distinction, then you also have to believe another corollary of that belief system, that ancient Indians and we, even modern Indians, also a majority of modern Indians also believe in the theory of karma and rebirth, karma and punarjan. Now, there can be debate about whether it is true or not. You can consider that it is entirely a lie, it is fraud, or it is hogwash. Yes, whatever it is. But ancient, that is a different issue. But ancient Indians did believe in the theory. And the karma and punarjan theory tells us that our greatest desires in this life actually decide what our next birth is going to be. They create our, because soul does not take birth, as Gita tells us, ego takes birth. And we tend to take the form of the thing, of the idea on which we focus on regularly. And that's why it was believed that most people were born in their certain, in the one which was suitable, in the condition, time, and place which was suitable according to their aptitude. So this was the sorting hat of ancient Indian society, if you were wondering about that. But even now, I am trying to cover all of the objections. Even now, if you think that it may be possible that some individuals may have committed some mistake, and they are confused, they are born in some other varna which is not according to their aptitude. But there are stories, there are great stories in the Puranas which tells us that it was possible even in a single lifetime to change your varna if you are extremely uncomfortable with it. It was not easy. It was very hard. It was definitely hard, but it was possible. And our sages, our rishis made sure that these stories would be propagated over centuries. How? I will tell you the most famous story. The famous story of sage Vishwamitra and sage Vashishta. We all know it's a very famous story that Vishwamitra was originally a Kshatriya. Then he once had a tiff with the great Brahmarshi Vashishta, and he got angry. He had a temper. He got angry that how can this poor Brahmin deprive me of something which I want? And what does he think, that he has done so much penance? I can also do penance. It's not his privilege because he's a Brahmin. I can also do penance. And he went on. He picked the right path. He went on. He had a great desire. It started off, yes, his ego got hurt, but he had a great desire to change his varna. He wanted the privilege of being a Brahmin, if we want to use that word. And what did he do? He actually did penance for years and years, as the Puranic stories tells us, and he actually became a Brahmin. He is accepted as a Brahmarshi, as a Rishi, as great as Vashishta. True, there are differences in their tempers. Vishwamitra has always been portrayed as one with an irascible temper, and Vashishta has always been portrayed as with calm demeanor and very soothing demeanor. Yes, but they were both Brahmarshis, and because Brahmarshis, they were also Brahmagyanis. So it was possible for even a single individual to do so in a single lifetime, in the same lifetime. But for that, you had to have a great desire, a great passion to do so. And when you come to think of it, even in modern society, people who are born in wrong time and place, of course, we cannot choose where we are born. And those who are born in wrong time and place, they find it very hard to uh, overcome the circumstances of their birth. We will take just one example of modern USA. It is said to be the most equal society. It is, even before the French, they practice equality, fraternity, although in a limited sense. The principles of equality, it is enshrined in their constitution. And they practiced this, they legalized it and a society based on equal opportunities, that everyone, they are fond to saying, they're fond of saying this again and again, that everyone is born equal, everyone is born equal. And even in that society, in modern, in suppose 2020, if you are born to a single mother in on the streets of Chicago or city like Chicago or Detroit, who is a drug addict, 99% of the cases, it is possible, not only possible, it's almost probable that you will also turn out a drug addict, a pickpocket, or you will lead a very miserable existence, deprived existence for as long as you live, and you will have a shorter life because you might be killed in a street fight. Now, it is possible to escape out of that, and there are great success stories. They are fond of, Americans are fond of flipping these stories again and again, rags to riches stories. They are there, but they are, if you consider the percentage, they are minuscule. They are parts per million. Most of the people who are born on the streets, they die on the streets. Saying that even in modern society, even a society which is built on the principles of equality, and which believes that uh, everyone is born equal, it is not very easy to overcome the circumstances of your birth. So Sanatan Dharma understood it and tried to create a system which supposedly made the best of it. Now we have to question the very title of this talk. Because when we say, did Brahmins monopolize education in India? At first we questioned the very idea of education, that what do we consider as education? And then we actually have to pay attention towards there is a basic axiom that we assume to be true while asking this question. And that axiom is not just about this question, but about a lot of other questions, a lot of other assumptions about Indian society, Vedic society. That assumption is the assumption of equality. People believe, while asking these questions, while saying that there was discrimination in Indian society, people believe that equality is a universal concept. So let me tell you that the concept of equality is neither universal nor eternal. It, the universal equality that they try to, they cannot practice it. It has never been practiced anywhere on earth. But they try to practice, try to make institutions, and try to destroy ancient traditional institutions based on this idea. This idea of equality is a late 18th century French idea. It is neither universal nor eternal. It is a product of enlightenment in Western Europe. And this principle has never been practiced in human culture before. This principle is not practiced in nature. There is no equality in nature. There is no equality in human culture or human society. The reigning principle in nature is hierarchy. The reigning principle in all of the societies that were created on earth, it was always hierarchy. Now, when we talk that equality is just one of the principles, not the overarching basic principle, it does not mean that you are immediately, people start saying, oh, you want to oppress people like Hitler did. Uh, these are not just neat boxes from that. If you do not believe in universal equality, you believe in oppressing people. Let me say this very clearly, that discrimination does not mean dispossession. That just because you are discriminating, just because a society is discriminating, it does not mean that it is dispossessing certain sections of society and engaging in violence against them. Discrimination can also be good. There can be good discrimination, there can be bad discrimination. Of course, there shouldn't be a discrimination of the kind where a society, but certain community faces a lot of violence and debilitating discriminations. And I'm also not, once again, not saying that Indian society, that there was nothing wrong in Indian society. I do not want to paint a picture which is hunky dory about glorious Indian past, ancient India. There were a lot of ills in Indian society. And of course, some communities got the short end of it. Of course, some communities had a lot of difficulties in the medieval times and even in modern times, even during the British Raj. And we should do all we can to alleviate their condition, to make their condition better, to accept them better, to make the rest of the society accept them better. Those are different issues. But we should not back project the attitudes of modern society on ancient society. We should not assume that just because there was some discrimination in Indian society, the entire system was corrupt, that there were only monopolies in ancient Indian system. This is what I'm trying to say, that it is not right to base the reading of ancient Indian society on modern concepts. It is not right to back project modern concepts, which are constructs of ideologies, modern ideologies, on ancient systems of knowledge. Because what do we risk from it? We risk actually, without understanding, we risk destroying an ancient tradition of knowledge, ancient knowledge system. Tradition is more easily destroyed than understood. It is harder to understand it, but it is easier to destroy it. You just can choose not to carry it, and it will be destroyed if sufficient number of people do not choose to carry it. And by misunderstanding ancient Indian system through these corrupt lenses, we risk this. We risk destroying ancient Indian systems of knowledge. At last, I will just give you one example where we can judge whether uh, Brahmins had privilege or not. In the classical Marxist system, they say that certain community, a minority community, created a community which was minority in numbers. It created a monopoly of resources, monopoly of means of production, and through that, it created privileges for itself or its own community. This is the standard line of the Marxists. So if we consider Vedic knowledge as this product, and if we consider that Brahmins did create a monopoly which led them to monopolize the entire system and led the privileges to them. If this was the case, then assume that as soon as you remove these monopolies, what happens with privilege is that as soon as you remove the monopoly of a certain system, every community starts doing it, doing the job which was prohibited to them earlier, and very soon the privilege ends because everyone is creating the same product. This happens with privilege. Now let us assume the opposite case, that some tradition is a burden to a certain community. It is being burdensome to them to carry it, but they are forced to carry it. And let us say that when the monopolies are when the rules are lifted, when the monopoly is lifted, what will happen in the case of burden? That everyone will actually abandon doing it. When we consider the case of India, the case of Vedic studies, the case of Vedic knowledge in modern India, when the restrictions were supposedly lifted, when everyone was allowed to study the Vedas, we find that actually fewer and fewer people are studying the Vedas. That Vedic studies are not exploding by the logic of those who say that this was the privilege of the Brahmins. By if that logic is true, then Vedic studies should have exploded all over India, and the Agraharas would have exploded all over India. There would have been crores and crores of Agraharas right now. Everyone would be studying the Vedas. Everyone would be partaking in that knowledge, in that privilege. But this is not so. We see that with every passing years, fewer and fewer, even Brahmins are continuing the ancient Vedic knowledge system. And we are in danger if this is not preserved. Then in 2 or 3 generations, this tradition will almost disappear, like it has in the rest of the world. We were not the only ones. We were certainly Sanatan Dharma was the best, but we were not the only ones who carried these traditions. The pagan polytheistic cultures all over the world, they carried these traditions. Prophetic monotheistic ideologies, they came and they spread these slanders about the society, and that's how those traditions were destroyed. And this is a very important point, that looking for the modern evidence, it seems that carrying this Vedic knowledge system was actually more of a burden than a privilege for the Brahmins. Not a burden which was bitter to carry. They carried it gladly. I'm calling it burden in the sense that it was a very hard lifestyle to follow, to carry. It was very hard to propagate that knowledge system, propagate it through the generation. It was not easy, and the evidence shows us that once the restrictions were lifted, lesser and lesser people are doing it. And at last, I would just want to make one point about equality and discrimination. That Christianity, Islam, and communism, all of these three ideologies, they came riding, criticizing native pagan polytheistic societies all over the world on the basis of discrimination. They always, if you see the atrocity literature that not just Islam created, but also Christianity created, that communism created, all of their discourses, even 2000 years ago, is that the native pagan polytheistic society is very discriminatory. There are certain sections of societies which are marginalized, underprivileged, and that's why we will bring equality. All Christians will be equal. Of course, they didn't practice it, but they claimed it, and that all Muslims will be equal. And if you just convert to our brand, then we'll make everyone equal. Islam came riding on the principle of equality. Of course, they didn't practice it. There were a lot of inequalities in their society, but they came riding on this concept. They destroyed and divided pagan and polytheistic societies on the basis by alleging discrimination, by alleging lack of equality. So this narrative has to be questioned itself. The very axiomatic truth, the fetish of equality, has to be questioned itself. If we want to, let alone preserving, if we want to view ancient Indian knowledge systems in their true sense. Thank you. Here I end my talk.
Thanks for a great session. So the main question what I would like to ask is, see this huge propagation around the Chaturvarna system. So that is what where this hierarchy and everything comes, where Brahmins are projected top in hierarchy. So because of this huge propagation around the Chaturvarna system, the basic idea of why should I study when I am limiting my profession to just farming or a artisan skill. So this itself limits many other sets of people to just continue their family profession instead of indulging in the Vedic studies or huge great studies to pursue the greater careers like teaching or medicine or other things like a priest or something. So so the entire thing propagated around this Chaturvarna system, which itself it's like saying by God himself has said these things. This is what widely propagated. So how to counter this allegation?
Uh, if if you can phrase it again in one sentence, your question, that how to counter the allegations that are made on our society, that good people were not able people were not able to pursue the profession of their heart, in which their heart was set. Okay. So I think I've covered this in the topic itself, in the talk itself, that for a majority of people, it was natural to follow in the footsteps of their fathers. Those who did want to uh, pursue another profession, it was not very hard. Only in the case of Vedic studies, it was hard. There were prohibitions, but in the case of other jobs, it was not hard. You could go to a certain person who was a good proficient in that certain skill, and you could learn that skill for 1 decade, 2 decades. It is very common. It was very common for people who wanted to learn sculpture to actually become apprentice for at least 1 or 2 decades. For they would be just hewing stones, large stones, before they qualified to finer carving. And we still see people becoming apprentice of great musicians. Shastriya music is still carried on by the old Shastriya Guru Shishya Parampara. People become apprentice. So in case of these jobs in fine arts and artisans, it was not at all impossible to do this. Only in the case of Vedic studies, it was harder. And in the cases where the job, the profession was concerned, for what we call as in Hindi Panditai, where the rituals, where a Brahmin who is a Pandit who performs rituals to earn his livelihood, in that there were privileges, because that is like a job, and certainly they were wary of other people entering in it. So, and that everyone, even the carpenters were wary of other people entering in their jobs. They were careful in imparting knowledge, their skills, their crafts to the people that they wanted to. So in the case of jobs, it was not impossible. It was hard, but not impossible. In the case of Vedic knowledge too, knowledge was not, once again, not prohibited. But of course, if you want to take up their profession, then you have to adopt that lifestyle, and it was not easy. Yes, but that is not easy in any society, even in modern Indian society. Even in this everything goes education system, that anyone can do everything, what are we doing actually? I just took out this data. More than 70 to 80% students now are becoming engineers or doctors. Is it choice? Can we really believe that 40% of people are naturally born as engineers? No, they're not. They're just following the trend that is in the society. So even now, we are just engaged in 6 or 7 professions. And people who are born in certain, suppose if you are born to a great businessman, but if you do not have business skills, like Anil Ambani, it's very hard to get out of that system. So you will destroy it. You will be castigated by your brother, by your father, and by the society itself. But it's not easy to get out of it, even for those people, those who are very rich, those who are supposedly very privileged in society. So this always happens, that it's very hard for anyone to overcome the circumstances of their birth. Like I said, I would gladly do away with this earning the livelihood business. I am not a fan of it, but I cannot, because I do not come from a family, from a tradition where it is easy. So this is always hard. There will always be some inequalities of birth, and that is a fact. We cannot choose our mother and father. We cannot choose our parents. We cannot choose where we are born. So those inequalities will always be there. There will always be injustice if you consider life in just one life perspective. Because supposedly there is a very great question, very great philosophical question. A lot of people, a lot of philosophers pose it, that there is a 2 years old child, and he's traveling with his father, with his mother in a market, and then he runs away and is run over by a car. Then what bad has he done in just 2 years? He's just a kid, but still he died a horrible death. So what wrong has he done? So there will always be injustice, always be inequalities if you consider life in one life perspective. So this is a question which we do not have to either deny or confirm. One thing that I wanted to warn is that some enthusiastic Hindus just start claiming that, oh no, ancient Indian society was equal, there was gender equality, there was caste equality, there was jati equality. This was not so. There was birthplace distinction. Yes, the women were not equal, but equality was not the highest virtue for ancient Indian society, neither was it for the entire world, for the entire pagan polytheistic world. This is a very modern, in this form, it is a very modern French idea. And Christianity, Islam, and communism also rode on this idea to destroy pagan and polytheistic societies. We should be wary of this discrimination and equality business.
Pankajji, I have a question.
Yeah.
Krishna saying that Shudras are born from my thighs,
Yeah.
and that shloka from the Bhagavad Gita. Do you have a comment on that? That is used very, very frequently by the leftist narratives to malign Hinduism.
Yeah, it is actually, it is more than sufficiently answered by great scholars. So I will be committing just an audacity to answer to this. But I will once again take an example of the Hindu temple. The Hindu temple has a concept like every other discipline of Vastu Purush. The concept of Purush is not just in Hindu darshan; it is everywhere, uh, in every society, in every discipline. There is a concept of Purush. In Hindu temple architecture, there is a concept of Vastu Purush. Now the Vastu Purush, uh, he does not just lie. There are many depictions of the Vastu Purush, and his whole body is considered sacred once he has been pacified through invocation. So the thighs are less sacred, or head is more sacred, eyes are more sacred. This is not considered while imagining, while creating this metaphor of a Purush, even in society or in other fields. The thighs are not thought of as inferior parts of a body. And so because if you, many scholars have answered this, that if you cut off the thighs, if you cut off legs, then a very good brain is no use of. If all of the other body parts are taken out, what can a brain do? They have supposedly preserved some brains in some brine in various institutes of some famous personalities. What can those brains do? So I don't think they are misunderstanding the concept of Purush, of Vastu Purush in this, while alleging.
So my question is that whenever we counter someone on the basis of this Hinduism part, they tell us that in Arthashastra somewhere it is written, Kautilya has written, that if a Shudra listens to our context like of Vedas or something like that, lead should be put in his ears. That something is somewhere it is written. So is it a valid thing, or there's something within it?
Yeah, actually, it is in Smritis. In some Smritis, recommend very great punishments for Shudras, even if they listen to the Vedas. And so there were, like I mentioned in the talk, there were prohibitions even on listening of the Vedas. Why? Because there was a very great possibility of misunderstanding those mantras. And they were not just some things, they heralded potent power, potent energy. There was not just this possibility of misunderstanding a certain mantra in the Vedas. There was the possibility of creating great destruction. I will give you just one example. Hitler used swastik, but then abused it in many ways. Made it black, made it tilted. And look, if you see it from the perspective of Shubh and Ashubh, it actually brought up a lot of Ashubh for him, for his own army, for his own country people, for the people that he favored. So there was the potential of misunderstanding it. And then there is the question of some Smritis, the later Smritis becoming very harsh against some sections of society regarding some things. And we have to understand that Smritis did not have the status of Sharia in Hindu society. There were many Smritis according to different times and places, and they virtually disagree on almost everything. The only agreement that the Hindu scriptures have is that you have to meditate and you have to seek your true form, you have to seek self-enlightenment, ultimate truth. Apart from that, there are disagreements or virtually everything. But I will tell you, I will give you one example. Last year, I happened to study what our Shastras say about women. And it was true that even before the coming of Islam, some Smritis had started recommending lower and lower ages for girls to get married. In the Vedic ages, even they could be initiated into the ceremonies in which boys were, and the age of their marriage was not that low. But in later Smritis, due to some foreign attacks, perhaps not Islamic attacks at first, but other foreign attacks, maybe they were becoming unsafe, whatever the reasons, but they started recommending lower and lower age for marriage of girls, sometimes even as young as, not the consummation of marriage, mind you. That is why the tradition of Gona is always there. The marriage was always consummated when they hit puberty, many years after they hit puberty. But yes, the age was lowered to 4 years sometimes, and in some Smritis recommend as less as 6 years or 4 years of age. Now, when you do this, you can forget about educating girls, because in anything, because if you are just keeping them at your home for 4 or 6 years, or you are doing a lot of things, then education goes down the drain, a lot of possibilities of education. And there is also the possibility of them getting widows before even their marriage is consummated. And some Smriti said that if the marriage is not consummated, then they are not widows. But some Smritis also said that even if it is not consummated and the groom dies, the prospective groom, then they have to be considered as widows, and it was a bad life for them. So in the later Smritis, some Smritis, are as old as 15th, 16th century. Certain portions of these Smritis are. So Smritis do recommend some things which are not feasible anymore. I'm not saying to you can say reapply the old system, but I'm just saying to understand ancient Indian system in its own light. What we do now is a different question altogether. We can bring in a different system, we can think about it, we can consider it, but the ancient Indian system has to be understood in its own light. Thank you. I think I have answered your question.
Sir, I understood all of your points, and I agree about the fact that there was possibility of corruption of the Vedas if certain sections of people who have not been acquainted with it, learning it from their childhood, were allowed access to them. So I understood that part. However, my question is about the Hindu temple, because you did not go into it at depth during your talk. Is that if the Hindu temple, the institution of the Hindu temple was designed so that the divine could be accessed by everyone, then why is it that certain sections of people were not allowed into the temple? Was it something to do with some social circumstances, or had it something to do with that specific corruption angle of the Vedas, or something else altogether?
No, yes, this is a very good question. Actually, the Vedas, about the performance and listening of Vedas, it is very specifically mentioned at various places that the Shudras in total are not allowed to perform it. But in Hindu temple, the Shudras are allowed. Certain communities were not allowed, and these communities changed over time. Sometimes some community was not allowed. At some other time, some other community was not allowed. Mainly the reasons for those communities which generally worked with this leather, and that was considered impure inside a temple. So those communities who were supposed to work with these skins, they were not allowed these temples. Generally, those kind of communities. And then during the medieval ages, various other communities were added to it and during the Islamic invasions. And so it happened over the ages that even the Hindu temple inside certain, not the Shudras, mind you, because we should not confuse that. They were very few communities who were not allowed inside the temples. But even for that, they had the institution of Utsavamut. So even in that, they tried to take the Devta, the divinity outside too.
What I meant was that, you see, when you criticize certain commonly held opinions,
Yeah.
the normal scenario is that you gradually deepen your criticism. So in the beginning, you attack certain well-known claims, but you still assume some of the underlying assumptions.
Yeah.
Whereas those assumptions should also be questioned. Like, for example, the idea that Christianity and Islam brought equality. You say, yeah, they brought equality, but not in practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't really bring it, but they said they brought it. I disagree. They didn't even do that.
Yeah.
You see, in Christian society at the time,
Yeah.
there was plenty of inequality.
Yes.
There was, for instance, the distinction between the nobility and the commoners.
Yeah.
There was monarchy. The church totally supported monarchy,
Yeah.
opposed the French Revolution, among other reasons, because of this.
Yeah.
Islam, Islam, like Christianity, had the idea that we are all equal before God, all right, but not before society. And so in the Quran, it is several times said explicitly that, well, first of all, as a poor man, you should not make revolution to become rich. That is fitna, that is chaos.
Yeah.
But as a rich man, you should also not reform society in such a way that you become equal with the poor, because this is ungratefulness to God. He made you rich, and you should be glad that you were made rich and enjoy it, because that's the will of God.
Yeah.
And so Islam doesn't even have a theory of equality.
Yeah.
So you see all this nonsense of M.N. Roy and other secularists that Islam, was an anti-caste movement and so on. No, of course they didn't have this specific inequality form of caste, but they had plenty of inequality, and they didn't care.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah, of course.
My suggestion is particular to the question of Mr. Mukherjee regarding he raised the question about that was from the part of Manusmriti, chapter 4, where the punishment about the sutra is there. But in the same book, it is mentioned about the changing of their duties. Like the punishment is chapter 4. If you read chapter 5 in Manusmriti, there is an explanation where the varna can be changed. A sutra can work as a Vaishya, and Vaishya can work as a Kshatriya, and Kshatriya can work as a Brahmin. So this interchange is there, explained there. So this I just want to add. My question was on the permission of certain people inside the temple. So as Mr. Saxena has explained this thing, that the person who is working with the leather work, they are not allowed to enter. But in Gita, Bhagwan Krishna, when explaining about the meditation, he is saying that you can sit on the kusa mat or on the mrigichala.
Yeah.
So if a person can sit on a mrigichala and do the meditation, then why he can't go into the temple?
Yes, about this, I did not say it was justified. I said that over time it happened in certain Hindu temples, in certain regions, that they did exclude certain people, certain communities who worked with leather, and there were other communities too. I'm not saying it was justified. I'm not saying there are not contrary examples in Hindu scriptures, Hindu history. But I'm just saying that we also have to accept, because it's the evidence is in front of us, that in some Hindu temples, yes, some communities were not allowed inside. Even today, we can see a few examples of that. There are certain reasons. They can be valid, they can be not valid. There can be different examples in our scriptures, in our history. But yes, it happened that even in the Hindu temples, at different periods of time, some communities were not allowed. And I don't think we should shy away from this fact.
The thing is that, first of all, a footnote to what Dr. Elst said.
Yeah.
Actually, the Catholic Church in the 17th century, I think in 1623, had a papal bull, which explicitly allowed converts to keep their caste practices.
Yeah.
Because caste was considered social and it had nothing to do with heaven or hell.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a footnote to what he said.
Yeah.
Now the question is, out of 4 varnas, 3 varnas are allowed to carry out Vedic studies, right? Now the question is, in normal times, not in emergencies, in normal times, is there any historical evidence of a Kshatriya assuming Brahmin occupations or a Vaishya assuming Brahmin occupations? Because all of them are eligible for Vedic studies. So theoretically, if somebody, a Kshatriya, had aptitude for this Vedic ritual, then he should be able to become a Brahmin. Is there any historical evidence of this?
In this, we have to consider what we consider as history and what as mythology. If we consider the story of Vishwamitra's history, we can consider that as a very good example of yes, people can change. If we do consider it mythology, then also we can say that our sages at least were saying that this can happen. About the historical examples, there have been, K.S. Lal has done a good study during the medieval ages in which people in Varnas were changed over time. It was not specifically that a person or an entire community, it was maybe possible for an individual to start thinking that I do not belong to this Varna or other Varna. But it was not possible and it was not natural for entire communities to start thinking from this day we are moving into another Varna. So it gradually happened that some Kshatris fell down to the status of different Varnas and then some became Kshatris later on. And I guess that similar things must have happened to Brahmins too, because in modern India, many scholars point out that in modern India, the number of Brahmins that we have now, it is much larger than it was in ancient India or even in medieval India. So the change certainly happened. It was not easy, it was hard, but the changes did happen over time. The one constant about Sanatana Dharma is that that's why they never created one single Smriti. That they understand this, our sages understood this, that over time you have to change laws according to time and place and attitudes. And there were different Smritis in different times, different laws in different times. As I said, if you read the work of Dr. P.V. Kani, they agree on virtually nothing except our Smriti cards. They agree on nothing except the one injunction that you have to find your true identity. You have to go after the ultimate truth. Everything else is, there are lots and lots of opinions.
My question requires a little bit discussion or background in the matter. Let me narrate the question first. My question is when exactly the difference between a Varna and caste appeared. Now, the background discussion is in Ramayana, there are 2 incidences where Shudra was one incident you mentioned about Vishwamitra. He was Kshatriya, but
Became a Brahmin.
via his hard work, he became a Rishi or Brahmin. In another case, one Kshatriya was cursed and he became a Shudra. He was cursed by the Vasishta's son. In Ramayana also, somewhere Banya caste and some other caste are mentioned. So in Ramayana period, Varna and caste both existed together. My question is, at what level these 2 things differentiated?
See, if you are asking about chronology, I don't think I'm the right person to answer this because many great scholars are working on chronology. I generally try not to study chronology and rather pay attention towards what ancient Indian society as total meant. So I'm because I have not studied it, so I think that other scholars there are various scholars right now who are working on chronology very well, and they are just very technical debates. So I think this question you would be better to put up to them.
Someone who's asking Suma Shashadri ji that why can't Vedic education be mainstreamed and made part of the schooling system. I'll just quickly explain. This is not relevant to this talk, but this is a problem related to the Articles 25 to 30 of the Indian Constitution, that anywhere where the state touches, with via money coming in either in land or in teacher salaries or anything like that, the state, being a secular state, cannot bring in any religious education. All our shastras, all our itihasas, even the Bhagavad Gita or the Ramayana, everything at all, even Dhanur Vidya, for example, everything is classified as religious texts, and because of that, it cannot be allowed into the regular school curriculum. That's the general problem, which is brought by the constitution, and therefore this is actually we live in an apartheid nation actually, where the majority is discriminated against. So this is the entire Hindu Charter movement. If you follow Nageshwar Rao ji on Twitter, you will learn a lot more about this.
Nice talk. Thank you, Ji. Now, coming back to the original theme of this talk, that education was available for everybody, you referred to that beautiful tree by Sri Dharampal.
Yeah.
I think that I had to have gone, and I would like to validate my assumption. That my assumption is, see, India was economically a very strong, successful nation for thousands of years. And if I look at it, since I'm from engineering and corporate background, one of the foundations of that is education and training. And this caste system, as you rightly pointed out, gives this apprenticeship. And apprenticeship for any individual in the caste system or Indian system started at a very young age. The boy will learn the skill at a very, very young age, which means by the time they come to the youth or to the thing of occupancy or productivity, they're highly, highly skilled people. So that's why India could produce a very, very highly skilled labor, which was unbeatable across the world. So that was the foundation of our economical power. Yeah. So my question is my assumption or understanding correct, or would you like to add something here, Pankaj?
Great Dr. Sri R. Vaidyanathan has covered this very, very well in his books, and he validates this. He says that in politics, caste divides now. In modern India, caste divides a lot. It creates violence, yes. But in economics, in economy, it actually is a boon, because caste community-based groups finance these the new startups, new entrepreneurs, and they actually, without having to go to the banks, without having to take loans from the banks, they can actually become good entrepreneurs. Another part of that is that when you take a loan from a bank, the bank insider, bank employees regularly tell me that 50% of the people, at least, who come to a bank, when they are taking the loan, they know that they are not going to pay back. Even the bank employees who are giving them loans, small loans, that they know that these loans will not be paid back, and some other government will come which will waive off all of these loans. So taking loans from the government actually fosters a very lazy, not just lazy, a sycophant, an attitude of becoming a leech on the government and just taking money from them and just spending some years on that, and then taking another loan, and then declaring yourself bankrupt. But a community-based banks, the corporate banks, the community-based financial systems, they are actually very good in not just encouraging startups and individual entrepreneurs, but also in holding them accountable to their responsibility towards society and to the lenders. So that's very true. And Vaidyanathan ji has done a very good, we have also organized a talk at CIS Indus, and he has done a very good study about this. You should read Caste as Social Capital if you haven't already. And he is a master of that. He's covered it very, very well.
Brilliant. I've learned so much in this one video. I'm regretting not having you earlier.
This is about, the doctrines of Buddhism and the influence of Buddhism on this entire caste system, because it is talked much in the context of caste. So in Buddhism, along with right thought and right action and so on, there is also the notion of right livelihood. So if there is a right livelihood, then there must be wrong livelihoods too. So for instance, hunters and fishermen, and people who trap animals, I mean, the butchers, these people could be considered having wrong, so-called wrong livelihoods.
Yeah.
Do you think that has also contributed? Because in Japan, we do see a community called Burakumin, who are similar to untouchables, and they also have, followed traditionally these types of professions. Do you think there is some influence there?
Actually, there is. I think he was here, but he has disappeared now. Sir, Dr. Elst is here, and he has done wonderful studies. He has written papers. He has delivered talks on the specific question of Buddhism and whether Buddha endorsed or opposed, revolted against Hindu society or endorsed it. And he actually gives. I would not dare to open my mouth in front of him on this topic because he has actually done a very good study on it. And but whatever I understand, and whatever I understand also from Sri Arvindan Neelkandanji, he also says that it might be possible. I'm not, because I haven't studied the social developments of Buddhism and Jainism and the impact of Buddhism, reverse impact of Buddhism and Jainism on Hindu society. That, but he has said that it may be possible that the extreme non-violent and sattvic qualities that Jainism specifically espoused, it may have had some reactions in Hindu society. But I think Dr. Als is here, he would be much better able to answer this. Thank you.